Okay, now for our day's marathon runner. Most of you are going to recognize her as the author of a book that we absolutely love, and it's called Loving Someone with Borderline Personality Disorder. But she's a lot more than an author, although she's a very good one, I might say. She's a leading expert in the field of dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. She's dedicated her career to teaching the intricacies of this life-saving therapy to other mental health providers. Her experience is practical, as she's been a clinician for many years. And prior to forming Treatment Implementation Collaborative, someday she'll explain how she came up with that particular title, but TIC, there's another one for you guys. And becoming a CEO, she was president of Behavioral Tech, and you recognize that as the organization that also provides research and trains mental health professionals in dialectical behavior therapy. But I just love that she has put together this organization because in my simple mind, more is better, and so we now have more and more professionals, training professionals in an evidence-based therapy that saves lives and really is excellent. All you have to do is talk to some people who have taken DBT and seen their lives turn around. It's fantastic. So we're so grateful to have you, Dr. Manning, with us today. But thanks to her marathoner schedule, that's the reason I brought that title up, is that she also is going to have to scoot out the door right after her presentation. But let's say onward and upward, Dr. Manning.
Last night I was sitting at dinner with these lovely people who invited me to come to Houston, and I had this moment where I looked around and I was like, I am so glad I'm here. It was just this conference and what these people do. Houston really is known as the area for family involvement, peer coaching. Just, you really are a place that is moving treatment for people with BPD forward. And so I hope you all have an understanding of that. I can tell you as someone who travels all around that the sad thing for me is that there are so many places where there's no treatment for BPD of any kind, and here you have, one of the two American bastions of mineralization and a good amount of DBT. So I was listening to the presenters this morning, the Johns, and I thought, I want to start my presentation by saying my name is Sherry Manning and I'm a DBT therapist. felt a little bit like I needed to say that, but I am a DBT therapist. I am not going to be talking to you all about DBT, but I've been a DBT therapist for, it'll be 20 years in March. And the dialectic, as I was listening to mentalization, was I had this realization that I have a very elementary understanding about mentalization, and I have to go do some studying and some reading. And they have a very elementary understanding of DBT, so at least we're equal. But I do want to say, the one defending I want to make is that DBT is a very relationship-based treatment. I was never trained as a behavior therapist. The idea that I would do behavior therapy was actually abhorrent to me because I thought of behavior therapy as rats and lovers and dogs and bells and nothing about being relational, and I am very relational. And when I found DBT, I was just thrilled that it was a therapy that was based on relationship and helped people to have effective relationships who had BPD. So I did love it, and in 1993, when DBT came out, the thinking in that day was a lot like, I forget who said it this morning, I think the first John said it, that families were not only kind of left out of the treatment, but they were kind of summarily told, you're not invited. And I do think, you know, when you look back at mental health treatment, you always have to adopt kind of a non-judgmental stance. You know, when you look at basically how they waterboarded people with schizophrenia in the early 20th century, you know, they weren't going, let's torture people with schizophrenia. They were saying, this is our best treatment, let's do it. And someday, hopefully, we'll look back on what we're doing now and think it was as barbaric as people think some of the treatments were that were in the early 20th century. But there were kind of some solid reasons, I think, why families were left out of treatment in those days. And a lot of it came about, to use a lay term, empowering clients to manage their own lives. And also, there were so many adult people with BPD at the time who had been ejected from their families or who had ejected themselves. Kind of went both ways, largely on the advice of well-meaning mental health professionals. The beauty is that none of us think this way any longer. So 20 years, I'm always saying to people, don't really take what the manual on DBT says as gospel around family involvement and what we call consultation to the patient versus environmental intervention. But really look at what we're doing now, which is to say, so the best way to treat anything is to treat everything. And that includes the family. And I gave them an example yesterday, and I think I'm going to tell y'all, because I always like to have my newest things that have happened. So, started work, my current passion in life is transition age, suicidal people with borderline personality disorder. I love them, 18 to 25. And, you know, they're not, adolescent treatment isn't the treatment for them, and adult treatment isn't there, and they're, you know, don't take this the wrong way, but they're seriously out of control. And I just really like that.
We have a cue for you.
You know, it's interesting. Everywhere I go, people are like, can we have your phone number? You know? But it is a different population, and it requires a very, I think, kind of balanced look at involving families. So the young woman, 19, sent to me just kind of like, she had one of those experiences in life that would crash and burn anybody, but she was already emotionally sensitive. But it was a conflict between her parents that involved another woman and the local Baptist church and all kinds of stuff. And the dad ended up leaving and now has legal papers that say she can't step in his yard or put things in his mailbox. And so she's been really distressed, and she was really suicidal and cut several times a week and binged and purged several times a week and had dropped out of college and smokes marijuana 5 to 7 times a day and came into therapy. And, you know, her first thing was, don't tell me you're going to try to bring my dad in here, because he takes restraining orders out on me. And the second thing was, don't tell me I'm going to have to quit marijuana. So it's kind of a DBT thing. But I said, if you don't want to quit marijuana, who am I to say you have to quit marijuana? I mean, Washington State just legalized it. You could move there. But that's not really on my current list. Here's what's on my current list. Get you a life worth living. Get you to quit trying to kill yourself. Get you to quit cutting. Get you off involved in other things. Then we'll talk about marijuana when it gets farther down on the list. So that was cool. She signed up. I think if I'd said otherwise, she wouldn't sign up. So she's been in treatment about 4 months. I'm in Canada. I get a voicemail from her mom on my home phone number, so it wasn't on my cell phone number. And it said, I'd like to talk to you because I want to tell you what's really going on. So I'm like, Always an interesting thing to hear, especially when you're in Canada that costs $1.50 a minute to talk to somebody on the phone. So I texted my client and said, your mama is trying to call me. I suggest you guys both are in my office at 2 o'clock on Monday. Any problem with that, let me know. So mom comes to session, perfectly lovely woman, just completely wanting to help her 19-year-old daughter. And kind of at wit's end about what to do. Well, we start talking, and of course the marijuana is a little more than 5 times a day. It's more like 9 times a day. And I really think my client didn't realize how many times a day she was smoking marijuana. But by the end of that session with her and her mom, the client had decided she would give up marijuana. And she hasn't been perfect since then. That was middle of October. But she started tracking how many times a day she smoked, and she realized then how many times a day she was smoking. And she started working on bringing smoking down, and she feels really good about it. And she wants to be a medical doctor, so she kind of finally wrapped her brain around the fact that having a criminal charge in the state of South Carolina would not help her to get a medical license at another time. And I don't think for a second that I could have gotten her there this quickly if that mom hadn't walked in the door. And that if I had forced the mom in the door, forced either one of them earlier than that, it wouldn't have worked either. But her mom has not, it's not like her mom runs a bunch of contingencies. The only contingency her mom had was, you cannot drive my car when you're stoned. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But having her involved has changed the whole therapy. And it didn't require a lot of deciding what the limits were or what the ethics were. It was just a conversation between 3 semi-reasonable people that came up with a goal that's going to help all of us. So what do we want to do here? Well, y'all can tell I talk a lot. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to say what I have to say. I did get 2 one-hour blocks. So I put together one major presentation and threw a slide somewhere in the middle of it that said maybe this is the break, but I don't actually know where the break is going to be because some of that's going to depend on what we have to say and how we have to say it. But I think that there are some ways that we can respond to people who have intense emotion that are helpful. And a lot of these have come out of my work with borderline personality disorder that started in, I was trying to think when that was. I had a conversation with my advisor in college. But I think it was like 1986. And so some of it's just kind of stuff I've learned, stuff that is kind of the DBT way of looking, and a lot of feedback from a lot of family members. So I developed this kind of 5 steps. I like to have lists because I'm kind of a memorization person. So if I can like memorize something and then I can pull out the little list, I'm always better. And if you've ever seen the manual for DBT, you will understand part of why I love DBT because it's really 700 pages of checklists. So we're going to talk about that, one of the lists, and we're going to talk about a lot about validation. Because one of the things I do think with mentalization and DBT is this whole idea of validating. And validating is about really getting the experience of another person. And where validation backfires is when we just say words that don't have the communication of understanding behind them. So we're going to start by talking about validation, which kind of feels to me like, I don't know, talking about moving water with Moses in the room, because we've got Karen who wrote the book on validation. So any questions you can send to her. In the manual for DBT, in the treatment for BPD, is this set of behaviors. They're all the behaviors that we're always working on. Decreasing suicidal behavior, life-threatening behavior. Those are the pieces that the therapists learn. But inside, covered in the chapter title, this like dialectical dilemmas in DBT that doesn't really show you that this is how we think, are these 5 patterns or 6 patterns of behaviors you see in people with borderline personality disorder that I think can, if you understand them, can help you decide how to respond in any given moment. So when I sat down to write my book, it's kind of how I conceptualize behavior after all these years of doing DBT. So I wrote the book kind of around those 6 areas. And so we're going to go through those. I know that understanding breeds compassion. And at the end of the day, the reason you guys are here is compassion. The reason this conference is here is compassion. The reason I am here is compassion. Because we want to extend compassion to each other and to the people who we hear about with BPD. And if we could get it to extend, other places in the world, we'd all be better. But DBT is a behavioral therapy, but what I'm calling it now is compassionate behaviorism. Because it's really how to modify how you respond to people. Behavior being thoughts, emotions, and actions. That's what we call behavior. It's not just action, but it's also emotion and cognition. And how to respond compassionately to people in ways that move them closer to where they want to be and preserve our relationship and maybe even strengthen our relationship with them. So basic guidelines for responding, and I put BPD in here because I love people with BPD. That's my mission in life, and this is a conference on BPD. But if you think about this, you could really call this basic guidelines for responding to people. I got to tell you, for me, when I'm really on my game, it's basic guidelines for responding to husbands. Unfortunately, I seem to be a lot better at basic guidelines of responding to other people than him. But that's how it is. So, the number one thing that invalidates people is when other people try to tell us we shouldn't feel the way we feel. Even when people say it with the best of intentions, when you say, I am really distressed because the Texans lost to Green Bay. And someone says, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, honey. It's all right. And what happens to your emotion? Yeah, right? It goes up, right? So it's really easy to say this in different ways, including non-verbally. If you have a person who, especially if they've had the same kind of dysregulation about the same thing for a long period of time, and you've heard it, 72,000 times, and they start with, and do you know what she said to me? And instead of kind of wading in and saying, help me understand, you already get to hear it goes again. Right? So a big way to respond to someone, especially when they're dysregulated, is just to communicate that no matter what that next part is, you're going to work with it. That is a valid way to feel. The dialectic, the other pole of that, I think, is that when people have a lot of emotion, and especially when their behavior is kind of out of control, especially when that behavior is suicide or self-harm or severe eating disorder or substance abuse, where there's this thought, high-risk behaviors, that they could die or they could severely harm themselves. One of the things that we want to do is create a world to keep them alive and manages our own anxiety. I see this happen with my clients. Where a person is really, really in agony, and I'm worried about them, and what I want to do is keep them safe. And in keeping them safe, treat them as if they can't manage their own life. And what does that do? It makes me sleep at night. So I feel better. And often what I'm doing inadvertently is communicating to them that they are not capable, too fragile, unable, or somehow even sometimes unworthy of my hanging in there with them. Now, I say this, and I have, clients, and it's kind of like, I call it whack-a-mole. Y'all know whack-a-mole? Okay, it's kind of whack-a-mole. At any given moment, I have one or two heads popped up that are really in difficult shape. But these are your family members, and any anxiety that I have is only, a 100th of what you have about this. And so I sometimes feel like I'm saying this to people, who have a struggle that is so much greater than what I'm talking about. But we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but it really is important not to create a world that supports suicidal behavior. In order to really do this, you got to understand the tasks of emotion regulation. I got to say, our emotion regulation really teaches people how to have relationships with other people to bring their emotion down. I just want to say that, since that got put on a slide. But a lot of what our people are relational people. Relational people do better in the context of relations with other people. I do think sometimes if I could just get everybody a good romantic partner, I could put myself out of business. The problem, of course, sometimes is maintaining those relationships. But the reality is, we live in a society that has, for the last century, overvalued individuation, autonomy, those kind of concepts, make it on your own. And the people who I love, my friends, the people who I treat, don't work that way. They don't aspire to that. It is not in their biology. It is not in their learning history. What they have to do is learn how to regulate emotion by regulating relationships. So that is a big piece of DBT. We just also have other ways of regulating emotion. So you got to understand what regulating emotion is. So in the interest of y'all having sat all day, this is what I want you to do. When I say go, I packed up my bell, or I'd used my little mindfulness bell. When I say go, I want you to stand up, take your fists like this, pump them in the air 3 times, and say, "Go Texans." All right? Does everybody understand? I know. Don't worry, Dallas fans. I will get to you. All right. So, got the instructions. You're going to take your hands 3 times. Go Texans. Go Texans. Go Texans. You ready? Stand up. 1, 2, 3. Go Texans! Go Texans! Go Texans! Now sit down. Now just think for an instant that instead of having 100 plus adults in here, we had 100 plus kindergartners. What would be happening right now? We would have chaos, right? There'd probably be some cartwheels, and people would still be screaming, and it would take us until lunchtime to get everybody settled down. So what did you just do? Well, on command, you physiologically up-aroused. You went from sitting, heart rate quiet, still, standing, body kind of up-aroused, right? You pulled it up, you did things, and then we said stop, and you turned it off, and you sat back down. You down-aroused, down-regulated your physiology. You down-regulated your emotion. That is emotion regulation. It's the ability to take in a moment and say, okay, I'm here, I'm depressed, I have no energy, I feel shame, I feel all these things that are kind of low energy, and I'm going to do something to physiologically up-arouse. Or I'm angry, I'm anxious, like my heart's beating, everything in my body is going, and now I'm going to bring it down. That's emotion regulation. Now, who in here is a Dallas Cowboy fan. So now you know, no beating up the Cowboys fans at lunch. So now, you Dallas Cowboy fans, I just happened to have dinner with them last night, so I can pick on them. Now, did you have thoughts, no way in hell am I standing up and rooting for the Texans? You felt betrayed, you had emotion, you felt betrayed. Did you do it anyway? I didn't look over to see. You did, see there, okay. And you felt like, oh, you're a group player, so you're going to go. See, we love you. Compliance. We love compliance. How about you? Went along to get along. There is skill in that, right? We call that pro-social behavior, right? Okay. You organized your behavior in the service of an instruction. So my guess is there's a part of you that was kind of like, well, I'm here. I signed on for this. You know, so I'm going to do it in spite of. And some of you might have been like, I am not a stand-up fist pump kind of person. Yeah, so why'd you do it? Because you got influenced by the crowd. Did you come here, like, did you have a goal when you came today? What was your goal?
To learn more about the PPD and dealing with people with it and myself.
So somehow, did y'all hear her? She had a goal of coming here and learning how to deal with people with BPD and working on herself some. And so that, you did this maybe because you had this goal and you thought somehow that yelling for the Texans was going to move you towards your goal. All right? Did anybody here have to really combat being inhibited to do this? No, y'all are a disinhibited group. You gotta love that. See, that's why we're all in this room, because we are kindred. Sometimes what you have to do to get through something like that is put your attention on other things.
You have to pretend sometimes.
Sometimes you have to pretend. Sometimes you have to say, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to look at the wall and focus on the wall and not think about what I'm saying. Right? All of that is emotion regulation. So emotion regulation requires that you be able to put your attention on something else. When your emotion is high, that you can reorient your attention. So we all do this when we're upset about something and we go for a run. We put together a conference. We work on the conference. So we're doing other things that regulate, that bring down emotion in the moment. We do up-regulate and down-regulate. From now on, you just think Texans. You stop from doing what your emotion tells you to do, or your mood. This is called non-mood dependent behavior. So if you were sitting there thinking, I'm not doing this, I am totally not about doing this, and you didn't, you engaged in non-mood dependent behavior. Like they were saying this morning about waking up and saying the sun is shining, I don't want to be in the conference. Coming is engaging in non-mood dependent behavior. And then really importantly is to have a life that has goals that require that you not give in, so to speak, to all of your emotions. So that's kind of my point with the coming and doing this, even though you don't really know you want to. So you want to remember those tasks. I think committing these to memory and saying, what is my person doing here? This person that I love. Are they so focused on emotion? Do I need to help them reorient? Do I need to encourage them to change the physiology around their emotion in this moment? Do I need to work on getting them not to kind of go with what they feel like doing when that can be problematic? And majorly, do I help them create? Am I a partner for them in the creation of a life that doesn't include suicide, self-harm, and other problem behaviors? And as you're doing that, to remember how difficult change is for any and all of us. I usually have to remind myself about changing a behavior. So, just remember, mine is exercise. Of course, if I ever wasn't traveling, it'd probably be easier. But tomorrow when I get home, I'll wake up, I'm sure tomorrow morning, and I'll be like, Monday morning, I'm exercising. We'll just take bets on how tired I am on Monday morning and how it's going to be too dark, too light, too sunny, too cloudy. I'm too tired. Oh, I have a lot of energy, therefore I should be writing and not exercising. And how difficult it is for me to change exercising behavior. How frustrated I get with myself. How painful it is on the few days that I walk upstairs to my exercise room, not even get in a car. But how changing anything is hard. And then changing emotion that has largely functioned to regulate emotion, pain, has either brought down pain or creates more pain, is going to be a monumental task. It's why we're so lucky to have you family members, because this is too Herculean for a client and a therapist. It requires more people. So where do you start? You start with validation. As I said, Karen, see, she ducked out of the room now because I keep talking about her. Karen wrote a fabulous book. It really was a lot on parenting, using validation with children. But it is a great, understandable book on how to validate. So why do you validate? DBT uses validation strategically. I think, often we're validating people, so we say validating things. I gotta tell you, as a rule, I'm not very validating. People are always like, you're so validating. I'm like, oh, you just don't know. As a rule, I'm kind of like, change your behavior. Come on, do this. I hear it when I get tired because I'll start saying to clients, you just need to. I'm trying to get the word just out of my vocabulary. Because I'll say, you just need to. And I can be assured that the moment I've said just need to, I have neglected to validate the client. And of course, my clients are really smart. They hear that just, it's like the just comes out in capitals, and invalidates them, and then they're not going to do my need to whatever, because they're going to be upset with me. So validation functions to bring down the arousal in the room. My new working theory is that when you stop and validate another person, the mindfulness, the mentalization, if you want to say, of that requires you to regulate your own emotion. And so if you are interacting with somebody and you feel yourself getting emotional, if you stop to find something to validate about the other person, that requires a level of mindfulness. You've got to momentarily disengage from whatever's happening in the room. And the act of finding it will bring your emotion down too. So validating another human being not only brings down their emotion, but it brings down our emotion, which then makes us more effective. So I think it's good for everybody. You can validate yourself. I mean, a lot of what we have to do is what we call self-validation. A lot of what we try to teach our clients to do is self-validation. What I'm talking about this is that in the heat of the moment, pause and find something to validate. That pause is going to bring down the intensity of the emotion. The act of finding the validation will bring it down. And then it communicates an understanding that opens the door. My clients call it the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. I call it that candy coating that they put on the outside of pills. It is there because it communicates an understanding of the clients. And then you can work on solving the problem. And I think that one of the things that happens when we're with other people, it's so much easier to solve other people's problems. My clients are always like, you're so good, why can't I be like this? I'm like, trust me, you could with my life. If you were looking at my life from the outside, you could solve all my problems. I mean, it is much easier to solve somebody else's problems. But validation opens up everybody's brains and makes problem solving easier all the way around. Wrong way. How many of y'all know this? This is the 6 levels of validation. Some of you all do. You can raise that hand. You can be proud. She knows the 6 levels of validation. That's pretty good. I know therapists that don't know the 6 levels of validation. So these are non-hierarchical. I want to spend a minute with them, but just trust me when I say practice these. This is a list you really do want to know. The first is to stay awake. Staying awake really means, well, of course it means staying awake. You know, if you've ever had somebody fall asleep in the middle of a conversation, it's a little invalidating. I had a client once. I was working in a prison doing DBT, and I'd been there just a little while, and she came in, she said, you know what I really like about you? So I'm waiting. You know, I love compliments. I'm reinforced by praise. Bring it on. Bring it. She's like, you don't fall asleep during my sessions. A higher order therapeutic skill there. But come to find out, her last therapist, that's what they did. She would come in, she was so dysregulated. I mean, bless her heart, she was so dysregulated that she would write page after page after page of what she wanted to say during the therapy session. Because if she just tried to talk, she couldn't, because she would get so distraught. And then she would read it, right? And he saw her right after lunch. So he'd just fall asleep. At the end of the session, she'd wake him up and say goodbye. And in a lot of ways, I could understand. I had compassion for him. I just told her to quit writing it down. We would learn how to talk. But staying awake is just the act of listening, non-judgmentally. So if you're sitting there and even in your head, you start going, oh, here we go again, same old, same old. What's going to be new? Then what will happen is that the communication to your loved one will be that their pain, their experience is not worth listening to. And when that happens, their pain, their agony, and their emotion will go up. And then anything erudite that you have to say to them will be lost. All right. You can tell I love to do practices because I just think, you know, bless y'all's heart, this is a long day. And even though it's great information, it's still a long day. So this is what I want you to do. But kind of in sections. I want you to like get a partner. Do a dyad. You know, trainers love dyads. It's the only time you ever use that word dyad is when you're standing in front of a microphone. All right, so get in a dyad. Get somebody else. And one of you raise your hand so we can all see who you are. Go on. Go. Okay, good. All right, so this is what I want you to do. Person with your hand up. You are the storyteller. Okay? So you get to tell this person. Now, this works best if it's something real. So you put your hands down, sorry. You want to tell a story to this other person of something that has either recently happened or something that's about to happen or something that's happening right now. Now, don't make it your deepest, darkest secret. We do not want to open that up in here right now. But I just want you to tell a little something about something that has recently happened. And this first time, this person is going to not pay attention to you. So you can do anything else. This is when I do need my bell. At some point, I will stop you. And when I stop you, I want you to immediately attend. I want you to non-judgmentally kind of restate what the person says, communicate hearing and understanding to this person who's telling you the story. But first, you get to have fun and not pay attention. Okay? So everybody understand the instructions?
So the first time you don't want us to pay attention.
The first time I don't want you to pay attention. I want you to do anything but pay attention. And you just keep on telling, I'll stop, and then you can finish your story. If you've already finished your story, retell it. But most people I find have long stories. So when I say stop, or go, or turn, or whatever I'll say, then turn your attention to them. All right, you ready? Okay, go. Start listening and reflecting back to them what their experience is. The person who was telling the story, tell us what it was like when the person was not paying attention. Yes?
It was difficult to go on with my story. I found myself stuttering on my words and not being able to finish because she wasn't even looking at me.
All right, and did you notice emotion?
A little frustrated.
Frustration?
I wanted to go like looking at my face.
So basically, if you want to get a person to quit talking, quit listening. Like you were just having a hard time going on. But you kept talking. Oh, good. Yes.
Yeah, I was talking and she wasn't paying attention, so I was putting, speaking louder and trying to work here.
Exactly. Yes.
Checking his phone and I wanted to take the phone.
Did you notice a little anger, irritation going on there? Yes.
I'm used to talk to people who don't pay attention, and I talk for days like that, so it really bothers me. It's frustrating when it's not louder.
So for those of y'all who couldn't hear, she said she's pretty used to listening to people, talking to people who don't listen, but she can talk to her cats. I find cats very validating. I hesitate to say this in large groups of people, but I have 8 of them. So if one doesn't validate me, the other one will. Okay, so, this is now, we do this and we laugh and, I think there's value in keeping things light because there's data that your brain learns better. But now think about this with being a person who has that biological sensitivity and who may have thoughts that what they say doesn't make sense, is dumb, is crazy, whatever that kind of piece is, that self-invalidating piece that goes in our people. Imagine then having this experience of the world looking at its cell phone or not paying attention. And what happens often is exactly what happened with you, is that people then try to be heard. They try to be understood. And the way we do that, all of us, is we get louder or we get more extreme to the other direction. We just go mute. Or we do something to show people what we were trying to say to them. So the experience of our people is that they are often communicating intense suffering. And we sometimes are not even awake to it. And when we're not, then they will increase their communication of it. Not because they're trying to manipulate us, but often because they're wanting to be heard. They're wanting to tell their story. So just these two little simple, I threw in accurate reflection, which is saying that you understand. Saying, I always tell my graduate students, they're not allowed to say these words, but if you start with these words, it's okay. So what I hear you saying is, like, what? I mean, who else do you say that to if you're a therapist? Like, I've never said to my husband, so what I hear you saying. And we're very much against speaking therapies. If you talk that way to everybody, talk that way to people with BPD. But if you don't talk to them that way. It's very demeaning. So that's the beginnings of validation. It's just the act of being heard and understood. And that being understood communicates that you're not crazy, that you're understandable, which opens people up to the rest of what you have to say. The third is probably a place where middleization comes in, which is mind reading. Now, the interesting part about this is, in DBT, we try very hard to teach our people not to mind read. Now, there were studies that were done, there were social psychology studies, where they looked at people's responses to other people. And what happens when you interpret another person's behavior? They found out that over 90% of the time, when we interpret another person's behavior, we interpret it incorrectly. So, now that doesn't mean that you can't do a treatment that's about doing that better. I mean, we actually could probably bring the data down if we had a psychotherapy that would taught people to do it better. But just in the general population, 90% of the time we're wrong. So, just think about this. Someone comes home from work, they look at their partner has an expression on their face, and they interpret that as they don't want to hear what I have to say, they've had a bad day. So they respond to them, right? And they kind of don't say anything, and then that other person says, oh God, they're not speaking to me, I wonder what I did wrong. They're really mad at me. By the end of the night, you have chaos and somebody's walking out in the middle of dinner, right? And what was really happening when the first person came in the room was they had a spot on their shirt. And their partner was looking to see if they needed to get out the spot remover. So this is what we often do. And so we try to get people to not be alert and aware of each other's emotions, but not to take them as fact. So if you're going to pose a hypothesis, could you be feeling this way? The idea is that you present it as a hypothesis and not a, you feel like this. You're angry at me. I can tell. Well, if I wasn't angry at you, I am now. Right? And if I'm emotionally quick on the reaction, then I may well have a big reaction to that. But if you just said, I had a thought, then maybe you're angry at me. Then that invites communication. And it doesn't say, if you don't feel this way, somehow you're wrong, which is what our clients interpret that to mean. All right, so these next two are the most powerful pieces of validation. How am I doing on time? So I'm going to do them and then we'll go to lunch? Oh, he says I can just keep going, you don't get lunch. All right, okay. This is what I did in Connecticut this week. We just ordered pizza and I kept talking. So the first is, every one of us, every single action we make in this moment makes sense if you know our lives. How we respond to things is a direct result of all the other historical moments in our lives. So I have a sister-in-law. She just loves the fact that she's my working example of this too. And she, see, when I say this, I know y'all know what I mean because I'm in the South. She lives on a barrier island. I said that in Connecticut and they were like, what?
Hey, I have an input to that.
Yes.
When the hurricane was hitting up in the Northeast,
Uh-huh.
I said, isn't it wonderful we get to hear all this stuff with a different accent for a change? They have Barrier Island that they get to put big buildings on and build subways. And then my husband, the geologist, who said, theirs is not a barrier
This is
island.
not a barrier.
They're
Yeah.
built on a rock. It's not a barrier
This
island.
is true. I thought barrier islands were everywhere till I said Barrier Island. And they were like, Barrier Island? What's that?
Sorry.
She was raised on a barrier island, right off the coast of Hilton Head. And her house burned down. Her childhood home burned down, totally burned down in a storm. Like, struck by lightning. They lost everything. I've known her all my life, so I remember when it happened. Now, she still lives on a barrier island. I'm like, A, we could treat this, or B, you could move. She refuses both, so I'm like, oh, you're choosing stay miserable. Gotcha, okay, that's all right. But when there's a strike of lightning, she has an immediate response. I adore thunderstorms. I go outside in them. People freak out because I'm like communing with nature. It's not that my behavior is more valid than her behavior. It is that both of our behaviors are understandable given our histories. Her sensitivity to thunderstorms has historical antecedents that I don't have. So if I'm to validate, if I want to validate her being in the closet during a lightning storm, which is usually where she goes, the way I can validate it is to say, of course you have all of this fear of thunderstorms. Your childhood house burned down in a storm. That's validating based on history. You can also validate based on biology. So if I said to y'all, it's a long day, I'm sure it's hard to sit here if you've got a bad back, or to attend to this if you've got ADD, then that's validating your biology. Okay? The next step is to normalize anything you can. So normalizing would be, it's hard to sit all day. Kind of like there's like for anybody after it. Okay? Or thunderstorms are dangerous. So the danger in this is that it's very easy to get into validating history. You know, like that's kind of the fallback, because anything makes sense given history. But if you could validate, if you could normalize a person's behavior, and instead you say it makes sense given their history, you have just invalidated them. So example, my friend gets mugged coming out of a movie theater late at night. She goes to see the Twilight. What is that? The Twilight Saga. Apparently they're camping out for that. And she gets mugged. And it's a year later. And we come walking out of a movie theater late at night. And she has an emotional and a physiological reaction to it. Validating her history is to say, of course you're anxious, you're worried, you're scared. You got mugged in this parking lot or in a parking lot at night. Normalizing is, it's scary out here in the dark. And if the context was scary and I instead said, oh honey, you got mugged, then I just invalidated her. And I think we do this a lot of times with our loved ones with BPD. Is we say, oh yeah, you know, of course we're validating because we read the book, we know validating is good. We say, yes, your behavior makes sense because that's the catchphrase for validation, right? Because you did this and you had this and that's your history. Instead of saying, listen, that sucks, which is normalizing. So when at all possible, normalize. Now the sixth one on here really is not for family members, because I have found family members don't have a problem with this, so I really write this for therapists, which is to quit treating our loved ones like we treat, not like we treat anybody else. Okay, that makes sense. To quit treating them differently. So I'll give you an example. I had a client, she was 4'11". Now you got to picture this. I'm 5'11". Her husband, 6'4". Her psychiatrist, like 6'6", and played first string defense for the Georgia Bulldogs. Yeah, I know that was my big problem with him. So, I mean, when we stood in a circle, she was already down here, and she had a little teeny voice. And I saw both of those big old men at different times go, "Now, do you need to go to the hospital?" My heart broke. Now, how could you ever get to a place where you could function like you were not a little teeny tiny person if the world talked to you like you were a teeny tiny person? So, but we do this inadvertently. We adopt, we get anxious, or we get righteous, and we adopt a style with people that we don't adopt with other people. So this is to say, treat your loved one like you treat everybody else in your life. What it models to them is that they're normal, that they are like other people, that they don't have to be talked down to, fragilized, as we say. Okay, so, okay, can I do one more thing? One more phrase? Okay. Here's how I think about validation now. I think about emotion as having a temperature, like it's a thermometer. So when I'm trying to do this with everybody, just not when I'm like being a good therapist, but I try now to do it with everybody in my life. So what I do is I watch emotion, and if emotion goes up, it's like having an arbitrary mark on a thermometer. Like if the temperature goes past 80, I'm doing validation. If I'm running a group and the emotion goes up, validation. And the idea is that you look at the emotion and you validate it and you validate it and you validate it until it comes down. Until you can see it, and you can see it, and you can feel it. I mean, I had a friend who did a study that basically showed that, emotion sheds electrons. And so literally, if you have a lot of emotion in a room, you have a lot of electrons floating around. Like the air kind of gets electrified. So pay attention to that emotion. And when that emotion comes down, then do the rest of whatever it is you're trying to do. And you'll see it go back up. And you just have to be mindful to that. You have to be paying attention. And then when it gets to that place again, validate, validate, validate until it comes down. And so you're constantly paying attention to temperature. And as soon as temperature gets high, increase validation. I put some exercises in here. I knew I wouldn't get to them, but I put them in here because I thought they might help you guys. To think about emotions and experiences that people have that you love, and ways that you might kind of incorporate into your language of validation with them. So now we have to have lunch. Is there something we need to say about lunch?
The
Yes.
sandwiches are organized.
Of course they are.
Sharing. There is chicken salad here, and then they have labels on them, so you can choose one you like. And we really, really, really would validate you incredibly if you could be back at 1 and settled. So that means we're going to eat lunch, watch the videos, have bathroom break, and we'll be back here at 1. Back in the room. When you're watching the videos during lunch, and you're going to be back in the room at 1. Because that's very, very important. Where are we eating?
I think it's okay to eat here.
Yes, okay.
So you pick up your food and come on back after you stretch your legs for just a few minutes, because don't take too long.
She's also bored with it, but it's going to about 25%.
I learned that from Sherry. Okay, guys. I got some important stuff I want to say. Getting up here is not my favorite thing. And a lot of people know that. Because I tell them every time they ask me to speak, this is not my favorite thing. But I got something that was important enough that got me out here. You know Brene Brown? Yeah. Brene Brown talks about a certain kind of person. She talks about a person who's willing to be vulnerable, who's willing to open up and be who they are, to do what they want to do, to stand up for what they believe in, to be passionate, to withstand all the criticisms that come from people who stand up and recount it, and to keep going anyway. When the critics say you could have done it better, could have done it differently, or when something doesn't work out. There are two people here that, to me, embody what Brene Brown talks about. Could you join me?
Spoken about with Brene Brown's name.
I knew you about that. Jim and Diane Hall. A few of you know them. You have helped so many people and been so genuine and so courageous. And you have been in the arena, as Brene Brown says. They got in the arena, they stood up, and they were counting. They were let themselves be counted at a time when not many people were doing that. They fought the battle, and we're here today because of a lot of the work that they did as well as other people. So we want to give a tribute to them today. From the Healing Hearts of Family Conference, we want to give you a tribute. And so I thought about it, I thought of all the things that I could say, all of the accomplishments that they have, all the people that they've helped. But then I decided there was a tribute that was even greater than that. So I have something I want to read to you. Dear Mom and Dad, this is a note to you from your lucky daughter, Carrie. I am the member of our family diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I am also the reason that Jim and Diane Hall sought help over 10 years ago through NAMI and NEA BPD and other support groups to learn how to survive within our fractured family. Mom and Dad, you quickly morphed into a couple that shared your experiences and aided others. You spearheaded groups where there was an acute need for families, she underlined it, to learn to spend the same effort in sharing and education as a designated patient of that family was learning to do. Rumor has it that you are being honored today. That is no surprise to me as I see the mounds of paperwork, the hours spent on your laptops, the commitments kept by phone and in person to help other family members through their difficult struggles. But the real honor belongs to me and the countless scores of people who've benefited from your wisdom and compassion. As your workload grew and your travels to conventions and symposiums and conferences increased, I initially became jealous of your dedicated involvement with others. I at first regarded your work as I would have regarded a new needy sibling, grasping at your every available moment. It is only through much time that I have realized that through your constant work with others, these newfound skills that you were educating others about were sinking in for you too. Through your hard work with others, our relationship began to strengthen. Our conversations became peppered with words like validation, skillful, feelings. Oh, and they are peppered nowadays with a lot more laughter too. We listen more and we share more than we ever have before, Mom and Dad. There's a peacefulness and an honesty in our interactions that was unthinkable 10 years ago. And I credit the way you dedicated yourselves to borderline personality disorder and other affected families that has come full circle to heal and improve our own family. And I thank you deeply for your dedication to others' families and your dedication to your own. There's more.
She's wordy like her dad.
And this is to you. And to all of you listening today, may you be starting your difficult task of loving someone with a mental illness, or working to hone your skills toward your relationship, improving your relationship. I ask a favor of you. I ask you to honor Jim and Diane in the same way that they have honored you, through helping others. Volunteer, get involved, jump in even if you think you aren't ready. Let your group leader know that you want to bring refreshments to the next group meeting. Arrange a carpool. Ask your group leader how you can train to be a group leader in February here in Houston. Investigate the mental health organization you're interested in. Maybe you're a graphic artist and they need a sign. Maybe you're an internet whiz or an energetic fundraiser. Maybe you gain strength by helping others gain theirs. Maybe, like Jim and Diane Hall, you have a gift to listen and gently guide others to appropriate resources. So please honor my mom and dad by strengthening your family and helping other families in the extraordinary example set by Jim and Diane Hall. This is the Jim and Diane Hall Award, which we're awarding to Jim and Diane Hall.
I don't know if this is, can you hear me? This is an unbelievable honor, and what wonderful people to be sharing this with. We do have a wonderful daughter, and you all have wonderful sons and daughters. Some are here, and you can have a wonderful life together. But I'm so touched by the whole day, let alone with this wonderful keepsake letter that Karen, I hope you'll give me that. And all I can simply say is thank you. Believe me, I've got so much more reward, both of us, from what we do. That it just comes back 100-fold, 1,000-fold. And makes us even stronger in our families and in our relationship. So thank you again. Please stick with us. We have a lot more wonderful new things to do coming right around the corner. And we're, as I said to many of you, I love jumping into the pool without knowing how deep it is. I get my son in trouble a lot. He at least he straightens me out. He says, you can't do it that fast. You know, go put the swimsuit on first.
Especially at our age.
So thank you.
Yeah, and just, I will not be long, I shall not be long, otherwise I'm in trouble. Yeah, I think listening to, is this on?
No.
Well, okay. Yeah, listening, as you saw, I had a couple tears, but a lot of them are just gratitude. We had, like many of you, either have or will have a long walk. I thought that the day would never come that I'd hear words like that coming from my daughter. But it's the dialectic is we changed, so did she. And so there's a lot of hope, and I just want that message to be reinforced for each and every one of you. You may be in despair right now, but hang in there. Things can and they do get better. You have to take care of yourselves, but know that we're all here for you. And thanks for coming today.
You're up.
And Dr. Van.
Part two. So I was having some really great conversations at lunch, and I realized, of course, 32 things I haven't said. But one, and some of them I will talk about, but one I want to talk about is kind of the difference between saying things that are validating and doing things that are validating. When I was in graduate school, first time, in the late 80s, we literally had a conversation in a class about whether or not you should hand somebody who was crying a Kleenex. It's like a debate. Write a paper. Should your clients get a Kleenex if they're crying? And then again, about a month ago, in my skills training group, in my consultation team, there was a moment in group where a skills trainer said to a client, never pass another client a Kleenex because you're saying crying isn't valid behavior. I was like, oh no, we're back. It's the 80s again. I'm all for the big hair, but I don't want that to come back. But there is a way in which sometimes, I was having a great discussion at lunch, or sometimes when you say validating things, they can come off as invalidating. One is if they're said like catchphrases or slogans from commercials. Another is if you could do something instead. So I've been on this, actually writing about it recently, because I had this wonderful client who was adopted at birth. She and her brother, not biological brother, but were adopted. Brought into a lovely family. Father was a prominent surgeon in our community who committed suicide when she was 12. And her mom just kind of went into her bedroom for a year or so. And this child was extremely, extremely vulnerable, had in her that experience of being non-belonging, an outsider, that is a real high predictor for suicide and often just makes her feel terrible. And so she's been in therapy with me, she's going along pretty well, and then her mom invites her home, she's like in her 40s, invites her home for a chat, never a good sign, right? And says, I have to tell you, you have a 50-year-old sister. I had her biologically when I was 17, and she's moving into the area, and she's going to be at all the major holidays. So this client, who doesn't have much of a place in the world anyway, had at least one place, which was I am my mother's oldest daughter. And all of a sudden, she's not her mother's oldest daughter. And her mother actually has a biological daughter. And the family's response was, oh, you should be happy. Now you've got a sister. Didn't you always want a sister? So we had to go through this whole thing. Mom came in a number of times. We just really worked on validating this. So I'm thinking I'm getting all this calmed down. Client comes in, she's very upset. She says, well, so I called my mom and told her that I didn't want so-and-so at my birthday party because I wanted to just have our birthday dinner. I just wanted to have dinner with her. And she so invalidated me. I said, really? What'd she do? She said, okay. And she called so-and-so and told her not to come. What? And this is invalidating how? Because I'm thinking, score, Mom, yay. Like, no fuss, you just did it. This is exactly what I would have said to them. Well, she should have said, so-and-so, you are my only daughter, and I love you, and I want to spend time with you, and of course I wouldn't invite Sally to come to have lunch, and it's just you and me. Like, she had this whole, like, scenario in her mind that she wanted said. Most of which kind of made me cringe because it was so sickeningly sweet. Like, it just didn't even, I knew her mother would never pull it off.
And I said, you know, you've missed the point here. Like, you got the strongest validation a person can give you. You said, this is my experience. She said, got it, and took care of it. And somehow you didn't experience that validation. So I started kind of working with her and realized that she doesn't experience validation, period. Like whether I did it or anybody else did it. So now we do this thing where every time I say something validating, I raise my hand. And every time her mother says something validating, she raises her hand. We're trying to teach her what validation is, so we're constantly going like this in therapy session. But the way I put it to the client, what she said made really good sense to her, was if you're in a house and the house is burning down, the fireman runs into the burning house and says, "Oh, it's hot. I can see you look really hot." It's understandable that anybody would be hot in this moment. Totally normal, hot, given how hot it is in here, you're hot. I can see you're hot. Or the fireman can pick you up and carry you out of the burning house. And validation is not only saying it's hot, but it's about sometimes working to solve the problem. So if your person comes to you and they're distressed about something, and you're trying to use words, and they're getting more and more distressed, ask what you can do to help. It's such a simple thing. But the most validating thing another human being can do is say, your problem is my problem. What do you need? So it kind of moves into where I'm going to go next. So the first thing you have to do is regulate your own emotion. And we've talked about validation as a way to regulate your own emotion, but also knowing your emotion. There are data now that say that if you can label your emotion, I am feeling sad, I am feeling angry, I am feeling shame, then it automatically starts regulating. It becomes more manageable. And I did this the other day. I was upset with somebody. And I'm like kind of stomping through the house, like ruminating, you know. And all of a sudden I was like, by golly, I'm mad. I know. Well, it took me a while. The minute I said I'm mad, I was like, oh yeah, I'm mad. Now what am I going to do about it? But until I had that moment, and I was just engaging in stomping behavior. Is that me? Am I making I was like, who is making that obnoxious noise? Oh, it's me. And once you observe and describe that, you can change it.
I had been working on it.
Yeah. Were you making signals to me and
No,
stuff?
I was trying to understand what the...
Oh, on the earring behavior? Thank you. Thank you. So anyway, start by knowing your own emotion. And then there are ways, you know, we all know, we were talking about this at lunch, like, you know, counting to 10. Like, there are all these things that we do. We call them the emotion regulation skills and DBT and distress tolerance. But I want to teach y'all half smile. How many of y'all know the half smile skill? Yes. Okay. So this is good because I want to make sure y'all all do it right, because I have found out that half the world thinks half smile is silly grin. Silly grin will make you feel badly, and I can show you a way to do this if you can't pull it off. All right, everybody. Think of something you find annoying. Can you do that? If you can't, I've got several things. I have to go to an airport in a while, so there's all kinds of annoying things there. All right. Now, what I want you to do is, when you do this practice, close your eyes. If you're not a person who can close your eyes, many of our clients can't. Find some place to look that doesn't involve seeing somebody else's face, because you will crack up and then we'll never get to go any farther.
Tell me something annoying. I can't think of it right now.
Tell you something annoying? When they close the interstate right by where you're trying to get to a conference on Saturday. All right, see? That was validating. Okay, so now what I want you to do is put on your face your I'm at a cocktail party and hate every one of these people phony grins. All right? I got to turn around because I can't look at y'all. Now, what does that feel like? What do your emotions do when you're doing this?
Sarcasm.
Feel sarcastic? It's kind of yucky feeling, isn't it? All right, now put on your biggest frown, like squinch up your nose, turn down your lips, squint your eyes. What does that feel like? Ridiculous, tight, silly, not pleasant. All right, now what we're going to do, this is based on kind of bi-directional nature of emotion, is we're going to put on your face a calm, half smile, meaning kind of a Mona Lisa smile. I've decided this is why Mona Lisa's still around, even though she's not so beautiful. It's because she looks like she's got something that the rest of us want. Best way to do this is to go like this. Take your hand and put it up here. Now, what I want you to do is slowly bring it down in front of your face. And as you do, relax the muscles that are behind your hand. So start by relaxing the muscles in your forehead, and then in your eyes and around the top of your cheekbones, and then lower on in your cheeks, and then in your mouth, and then in your chin. And of course, doing this already starts to calm you down. And then just do a teeny upturn of your lips. Not a full smile, just a partial smile. One that leaves you feeling calm. If you can't figure out how to do this, this is too big, so I can't do it with this. Take a pencil and put it in your mouth. And it actually gives you the same physiological benefits as a half smile. Okay. If you can do this when you are distressed, it will help you feel calmer. And the beauty of it is you can do it in interaction with someone else, and it doesn't push them over the edge. If you looked like you were smiling when they were telling you how distressed they were, that would be a bit problematic. But it will bring down your anxiety and bring down your emotion and help you to be more effective. It will open up the problem solving in your brain so that you can figure out what to do in that moment too that will be effective in dealing with the person. It's a brilliant, brilliant strategy. Wish I'd thought of it. Okay, you know, it's interesting to me we have to say this, but sometimes avoid the situation. The person's really, truly distressed and they don't want to talk about it, and you're afraid you're going to say what I call spiders and snakes, then avoid it for a little bit. Validate yourself and always find compassion. Find compassion for your loved one and find compassion for yourself. This is hard work we do. Okay, so after you regulate your emotion, what you want to do in the interaction is validate. Validate, 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 validate constantly. All right? If you validate, I was talking to somebody at lunch, if you validate and you see their emotion go up more, don't do whatever it is you just did. Try something else. Sometimes validation is just being with another person. We often don't ask the simple words, what do you want? What do you need? When we put our DBT consultation teams together, which is our therapy for each other, what we ask people to do before they say anything is, I need cheerleading, validation, problem solving, problem assessment, whatever it is. And I know, like there have been times when my dear sweet husband, he really is a great husband, but I've called him and I've said, you want to hear what's going on? Let me tell you what's going on. And before I can finish, he says, you know what you need to do? You need to go in there and tell them, and he can be totally on my side. You know, you need to tell them you're going to sue them, you know? At which point, I am furious. You know, because now I'm having to defend whoever it is that he wants me to sue. And what I realized is because in that moment, what I want is for him to listen to me and shake back his head and maybe at some point tell me it's going to be all right. But mostly what I want him not to do is tell me what to do. So we have started this thing, and it has done wonders for our marriage, where before I say anything, I'll say, I'm going to tell you something, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to validate me. I want you to listen and then tell me I'm right. I want you to listen for 15 minutes and then you can solve the problem. But just orienting. And then we do the same thing to other people, where remember how often we're wrong? So we're trying to validate, but we may not be giving them what they need or saying what's helpful. So if you're kind of going around in a circle and emotion is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, just stop and non-defensively say, what can I do here to help you? Don't say, what can I do? But really modulate your tone and say, how can I help you? What is it you want from me? Sometimes people say, I don't know. Then you say, so what if we figure that out? Because that is that functional validation. That's carrying the person out of the burning fire. Then you can brainstorm with them and troubleshoot with them and figure out. And then I think one of the things, I put this in the book because of my experience with people who are in relationships with BPD, is that especially like adult children kind of show up and there's a crisis and they ask for help and then the problems get solved and they go away and the parent's like, so what happened? Or they stay involved, so they follow up, so what'd you do? So what happened? And the adult child is like, none of your doggone business. I'm an adult. They're more regulated now. So what do? You say, are you going to tell me? When are you going to tell me? And what do you want me to do in the future? It's like stop guessing and start assessing. Okay, I just gave this to you as a list of ways of practice. So I want to put this all together. I told y'all this morning that Marsha Linehan wrote, guess I shouldn't take credit for her stuff, 6 patterns of behavior that we see in people with BPD. We don't see every one of these in every person with BPD, but they show up repeatedly. We call them the secondary behaviors, which means they function to maintain the primary behaviors. But basically that means they're the things that you'll see. You don't necessarily see your person cutting, burning, binging, purging. What you see is abject misery. What you see is them saying, I'm a failure, I'm a bad person, I'm out of control. So these are those behaviors. They're the ones that show up around those kind of high visibility behaviors, but they're the ones that live with our clients every day and therefore with us. So the first one is what we call emotion vulnerability. This is a DBT thing that we use the same term to mean 2 things. This is the second term. So this is not having high emotion. That's also emotion vulnerability. This is being vulnerable to being vulnerable. So this is where a person is having a lot of emotion and then they feel out of control. So you'll hear this when a person starts saying, I can't take one more thing. I'll say, I'm out of control. I can't do this anymore. And what's happening is you have emotion piling up on emotion. So you have a person who doesn't tolerate emotion well, and their emotion is so high, and then you get 2 or 3 or 4 of those. So their emotion kind of goes way up, and then it takes a long time for it to come back down. And before it can come back down, something else pops it up. And then before that can happen, something else pops it up. So they get kind of in this extreme emotion place. And then they start having cognitions and saying things to themselves like, I can't do it, this is too much, I can't control this. So they start having emotion about how much emotion they're having. And so you get this kind of sponge happening. We call it a whirlpool, where they don't know how to stop the emotion, and they feel like they're so out of control. And something has to get it to stop, and they start feeling despairing. And people will kill themselves. Should I tell y'all this? Do you want to hear how they'll kill themselves in these places? Sometimes I wonder, it's kind of a bummer, but they'll kill themselves here because they are so out of control. They just need to stop the emotion. The purpose of suicide here or self-harm is to drop the emotion. So they're the person who's saying, I'm so angry, I can't take it anymore. I am so shameful, I can't take it.
You said anger,
Yeah,
so it goes from desperation to anger?
it can be both.
Okay.
It can be both. You know, a lot of times emotion fires emotion fires emotion. So our people, like a lot of my people, this might be, I think sometimes this is a southern thing because I found out they don't have this one as much in Seattle. They did an anger study. I was like, really? Because I couldn't get enough clients to do an anger study. But my clients, when they get angry, then they start feeling guilty about feeling angry.
Yeah.
Because there's like social learning, anger's bad.
Oh, yeah.
You know, women don't show anger. What? Stoicism is good. Exactly. Or they'll feel shame. There's something wrong with me because I have anger. And so they'll get anger about that. And then despair is, it's never going to get any better. My life is horrible. And it's just going to get worse. Sometimes what happens here is they'll almost kind of flip to the other side, which is then becoming their own level of invalidation. So they'll start saying, oh, just stop it. Just stop that. But let's talk about what this looks like. So this is my little whirlpool. Something happens that's painful, a totally, like, I hate to use the word normal, but you know what I mean, like run-of-the-mill emotion, something happens that anybody would feel pain about. So it's not like it's an overreaction. It's a true blue prompt for an emotion. And then they have an emotional reaction to that. And that emotion is so intense and so strong and seems to last so long that they start thinking that it's going to last forever. And then the idea that you will never feel better than you feel in this moment makes them hopeless and despairing and just kind of bottoms them out, which then makes them more emotional. So it just kind of gets going around and around and around, and this despair and this hopelessness and sometimes anger, but whatever the emotions are, just are building and building and building. And that's emotion vulnerability. So impulsive behavior can stop that. It's why cutting is so difficult for us to treat, because it works. It will end this right here. It will crash out emotion, bring them down, and start them over again. I hate to say, but I always tell them that I don't have anything in my repertoire that's as fast as cutting. Someday I hope to, but I don't.
Was cutting prevalent a long time ago? It seems to me that it's somehow a learned.
I think it is learned. In my experience, it seems like it's more prevalent. They did a study at the University of Washington in the Psych 101 classes and found out that like 74% of people in Psych 101 had cut at least once. The good news was, the majority of them, like 40-something% of them, never cut again. But social media is helping people learn to cut. So I now need to do my public service announcement. This is about Tumblr. I don't know if y'all know Tumblr or not, but my adolescent clients and my teen, and now I'm finding out this in other places around the country. Tumblr is a social media website, but it has a very big cutting suicide group in there. You can post your cutting pictures, you can post your suicide poetry, you can do all these things, and if you go online and say, I'm going to kill myself, a whole group of people will say, don't do that, we love you, and things that reinforce out of control behavior. So we basically are telling our clients, no Tumblr. Did you want to say something?
It's hard to talk about. I have BPD, and I've been cutting since I was 10 years old, and it actually became an addiction after 6 years of it. And during junior high, there was those girls that decided, oh, she gets attention for doing it. I didn't do it for attention. I did it to release my pain. And something other than what I did. And they saw the teachers giving me their sympathy, and they decided, oh, well, let me scratch myself and I'll get the same sympathy, the same attention. And then it seemed to get worse when I got into high school because, you know, maybe drugs were involved or they just got a little gutsy with it and they started to cut more. And I think it's horrible, and I felt guilty because I thought that
You got them to cut.
And now I have not cut for quite a few months, and I'm very proud of myself.
Yeah.
But it's horrible because it actually turned into an addiction more than it was helping me. And that's when I realized I actually put myself here in vinegar. The older one I put myself in because I realized that I needed to help. And it did help a lot. And it made me realize that there's more things out here, you know, than just cutting and drugs and medication. I do not go to therapy, which I might need to, but I don't. I don't take medication. I'm doing it all on my own and with my mom's help. And I seem to have gotten a lot better. And some days, yes, I want to quit, but now I don't need it.
So let me say this to you. A, I think you're fabulous. I do. I mean, I just think that that you would be here, you know, and listen to this, that you did your own treatment, that you took yourself to Menninger. I believe that if you decide you need and want therapy, that you will get it. But that doesn't mean that you can't do this on your own. I do think that cutting is like an addiction. I have a friend who's in Germany who does actual studies that you couldn't do here, where you cut people and put them in fMRI chambers and look at what happens in their brains. And I think we are finding more and more that it does have a physiological thing that is a lot like using drugs. And I think people learn from other people. And if you ever want to give back, I think if you say that to people, that this is an important thing to learn. But kids are always going to teach kids what kids teach kids. I mean, this is, you know, I'm sure that in the 1700s they were teaching each other to do something problematic. Right, I don't know. Stealing each other's plows. I don't know. But I do, and it is why these behaviors are so difficult. If you read the studies on thinking about being dead and killing yourself, you know, there are people who are chronically suicidal, when they imagine being dead, whether it's by killing themselves or having a terminal disease or getting hit by a car in the parking lot, immediately their physiological arousal drops. So these behaviors work. It's not, oh, I'm just going to go off and, you know, get my teachers to give me A's. Now, some people, what happens, of course, is that we mobilize around this, and that can, over time, become a part of the problem. But we think that people do it anymore. I don't think that we think people do it solely for attention. They do it because it works. So what do you do when people are vulnerable? So you're in the middle of the whirlpool. The emotion is flying around you. You've got this person who you love saying, I can't stand it. I am, you know, basically suffering here from my emotion. Well, the first thing you've got to do is not jump into the whirlpool with them. So if you get more emotional in the face of their being more emotional, it makes it harder for them, because then guilt and shame come into play. Now look, I'm doing it to them. I'm a bad person. I'm making my family upset. So it's important that you regulate your emotion and then look at how you're validated. You can see validation is the key here. You can validate that emotion, that original emotion. I find it very helpful to validate the experience of the emotion.
I know you feel like you're out of control. I know this seems like it's never going to end. I see your hopelessness and despair. Then you got to believe that they can get out of it. Now the deal is you got to communicate this in a way that doesn't sound like, oh, I know you can stop this. You know, you just need to turn it off. It'll be fine. Like, you've got to be able to say, I have faith in your ability to get through this. And then ask if they want to help solve the problem. But notice that is not at the top of the list. So the other thing the person does, kind of the other side of that, is that they can become their own invalidating environment. Meaning they start saying, I should be different from this, I should be better, I'm a bad person. If you've ever met these people who seem like they just kind of turn it off, like one day they're in crisis and the next day they're like, oh, I don't need to talk about it, I'm fine now, it's over. That is not them being in denial. It is that they have truly shut it down. And usually the way they shut it down is by saying, I should be able to shut it down, so I'm just going to shut it down. As if somehow that's going to keep it from coming back. But that's where they'll get overly perfectionistic. And right there, people will commit suicide because they don't deserve. They are bad people. They should be dead. So the counter to invalidation there on their part is for you to validate them. So here are just some of their ways that they do this. They're hopeless, it's never going to get better. I can't solve my wife's problems, I'm incompetent. Don't argue. You know, when someone you love says, I'm a bad person, the human response is, no, you're not. You know, especially when there are kids or our partners, and we love them, and we see all the beautiful things about them, and hearing them say, I'm a bad person, rips us apart. Then in that moment, you've got to stop, slow down, don't argue, and validate the moment. Validate what's in front of you. So not the I'm a bad person, but the emotion that's driving the I'm a bad person. If you see them escalating, then you can say, I know this is how you feel right now. I see there's going to be a better day. I'm here to help you. I don't want you to think you're a bad person. Part of what you have to do here is what we call shaping. So one of the things that happens here is they, especially when they're in treatment, they come into treatment, they have a rough patch. You know, we all have rough patches. And one of the things that happens with BPD is that a normal kind of emotional response then gets invalidated by the person who's experiencing it. And so that then gets into the I'm a horrible person, I don't deserve to live. And then they think, okay, but I should be better. Like now I'm in DBT. You know, I'm never supposed to do this again. Now they go to I'm a bad client. Trust me, that's the one I see. So you got to be able to encourage small incremental change. And part of the way you do this is you find small incremental change. You point out like one way that this response is different from the last time. Here's my part 2, so now I made it to lunch. I've got till 2:15, right? I told you I didn't know. I just put that slide arbitrarily in the middle of the presentation, so it doesn't really mean I thought I'd be at lunch. All right, so we've got 2 of these 6 behaviors. We've got emotional invalidation, feeling the experience of being out of control and feeling out of control. Self-invalidation, negating their own experience, setting up situations where they think they ought to be able to solve their problems. Then you've got active passivity. I think this is a very difficult behavioral pattern for families. Because How many of y'all have ever heard the term passive aggressive? Yeah, I have no idea what that means. And I'm always thinking passive, like, what is that really? Yeah, I'm a behaviorist, so I'm ought to be really concrete. But this is not that. So please, my worry is that people are going to think active passivity is the same thing as passive aggressive, but it's not. So active passivity starts with a passive problem solving style, which means that people don't know how to solve problems. You know, there's actually like 7 steps to solving problems. You know, like who teaches that? Like where was my problem solving class in school? Like I didn't really get that. Like this guy named Art Nasu wrote this problem solving therapy. When I found it, I was like, oh, I get it. Like you can actually label steps to problem solving. But our people have had a history of trying to solve problems usually in ways that were not effective. So then they think, well, I can't solve the problem, or I'm inept at solving problems, or I just take the emotional way out of everything. And they believe that you can solve their problems. So they say, I don't know what to do. I need you to do it for me. I think this one's in my book, but I had my shining example. Everything I learned about DBT, I think I learned in the first 6 months, and because I made all the mistakes in the book in 6 months. But I had this person, I wish I could treat her now. She was stunningly brilliant, as many of our clients are. You know, had gotten advanced level psychology degree. The university tried to not award it to her at the last minute in spite of her 4.0 because they were worried about her being in a helping profession given her history. I was like, it's a little late for that, isn't it? But, you know, can you imagine, like, you finished with a 4.0 and then they're like, we decided maybe we shouldn't give this to you? So she was fighting them, and she got a job in an advocacy center. And she had a Friday where she got extremely emotionally dysregulated and ended up in her supervisor's office and cut herself and bled in a lot of places in his office. So I know nothing about this. I'm blissfully ignorant. And she comes into therapy session. We didn't even have our DBT building offices at the time. I was seeing her in a conference room. She comes into the conference room and she says, I have a situation going on here. I bled in my supervisor's office. I'm afraid he's going to fire me. I need you to call him and tell him not to. Well, I was learning DBT. I could tell you the page number this was on. So I said to her in a very invalidating way, I would be happy to coach you on how to talk to your supervisor, but I will not intervene in your environment. And she said, no, you don't understand. This is bad. I need you to call my supervisor and tell him not to fire me. And I said, oh no, I do understand. I can see you're really distressed. But I will not intervene in your environment, but I will coach you on how to talk to your supervisor. And she said, damn it, I need you to fix my life and fix it now. And that's when I learned what active passivity was. I also learned how extremely invalidating I can be. But her sense was that her life was out of control, that it was unmanageable for her, and I could fix it. I could solve her problems. And she didn't have really great interpersonal skills. Because if she had, she would have convinced me to call him and I never would have realized I was violating. So these 3 things come together in active passivity. Not being able to sit down, examine a problem, and come up with a way to solve the problem. Thinking that you can't solve it. Thinking that other people can solve it, and then not having a style that actually gets people to do things for you. And that comes out as active passivity. And this is where people get labeled as demanding, This is what we would call demandingness. It's thinking that you don't have a way to solve your own problems. And if I didn't know how to, if I couldn't figure out how to get myself to the airport to get home tonight, I would be going to every one of you and saying, can you help me? Can you help me? Can you get me there? And if you didn't tell me, I would ask somebody else. And if you didn't tell me, I'd ask somebody else. And I would hope that you wouldn't describe me as manipulative. I'm just trying to get home. And this is what our clients often do with us. So, we've got to teach them how to solve problems. Now, this is hard to do if you're, married to them. It's like, you can't walk in and go, I know how to solve problems, let me teach it to you. So, sometimes you have to gently model this, and I do think this is where therapists are helpful because we can teach this. But the first thing is for you not to judge it. Not to call, DBT, like we have outlawed the word manipulative. I had someone who told me the other day that they'd been to the chiropractor who manipulated their back. Please don't say that. All right? But to just know the behavior for what it is and not assign intent to it. That's about trying to pull something over on us, or they're just trying to live their lives. They're doing the best they can, and we have to remember that. So we need to ask ourselves, do they know how to solve this problem? Did my client know how to tell someone not to fire her when she bled all over the... By the way, she got fired. But she didn't know, and when I think about it, I didn't know how to talk to him about this, right? She certainly didn't know how to solve the problem. There probably was not a way to solve that problem. There probably was a way that she could have gone in. It was a mental health advocacy program. Surely there was a way for her to go in that she could have communicated this, but she didn't know how. Sometimes people know how to do this, like they have the words, but emotion interferes. So anxiety or anger. So maybe she could have talked to him and said, listen, I was in this place and I'm going through this program and I'm going to learn how to do this. But her own emotion about what she did, her own shame, really in this case, was keeping her from being able to do that. Does she have a confidence issue? Does she think, I'll never get it? What's the point of asking? They'll never give it to me. I can't do this. I'm incapable. So is she self-invalidation? Or does she just not know how to talk to people? And so maybe she was accurate in asking me to intervene, but her style of doing it was problematic. So when this is happening with you, you want to say, does she know, can she solve this problem? Is it solvable? Can she solve it? I use she just because I only have one he right now. Can she solve it? Is it solvable? Does she know how to solve it, but she can't because of her emotion, or she's not because of her emotion? Does she know how to solve it, but she doesn't think she can do it? So are her thoughts interfering? Or is it solvable? Is it something I should help on, really? Is the compassionate thing for me to do is to intervene, but she's not asking me in a way that makes me want to do it.
How do you buy time? There obviously, the problem exists, it's emotional, it's the crisis time or whatever. What's a good way to buy time so you have time to think all this in your head?
You know what I do when I need to buy time? I say I need time.
Okay.
I just say, look, I'm about as dysregulated as you are right now. I do this in therapy a lot, so I don't do things that are problematic. And I'll say that, like I need to, we call it wise mind in DBT, so we have this nice little mechanism, wise mind.
Okay.
So I say, I'm really emotional, I need to get to wise mind, I need a minute, can I just sit here and think for a second? And then I'll just get quiet, But they're not thinking I'm withholding anything, because I've already told them, if you just get quiet sometimes, then they're like, what? Then they'll get mad. So the idea, what I try to do with people is I basically try to get the bubble that's over my head to come out of my mouth. So if I'm thinking I need a moment here to get quiet and get calm and figure things out, I'll say it. Instead of just doing things and then having someone have to guess. You can tell I'm not much on inhibiting language anyway. If you're trying to help a person with this, you want to reinforce anything they do that's moving towards solving the problem. So even if I had gotten her to talk about how she could get this guy to help her keep her job, it probably would have been effective. A big thing you need to know about reinforcement, though, if you're not big on behavioral principles, you can say rewarding, is that there's a great group in our population that is punished by praise. Where actually, if you say praiseful things, it will stop a behavior as opposed to reinforcing it. There's a lot of kind of hypotheses about why, that there's an expectation, that they'll want more. A lot of times their shame keeps them from being able to just accept it. But you know, I had a client once who, again in that first group of women, who she would do her homework and I would say, gosh, that is so great, I am so proud of you. I thought I was doing great, like I'm reinforcing her, right? Except she quit doing her homework. Because her uncle used to say that after he had sex with her.
Oh.
And I had no idea. I just plunged into this thing. Now, what would I do now? I'd say, you know what? I was praising you and you quit doing your homework, so what's going on? I'd actually ask, what happened? And when she said, my uncle said this, I actually would know there's a therapy issue that we're going to have to deal with in the future. But for now, to get her to do her behavioral homework, I wouldn't say I'm proud of you. I'd say what would reinforce you instead? Apparent competence is the sister of active passivity. Apparent competence is as much about what we do as it is about what our loved ones do. Have you ever seen someone who could say, I've had the worst day of my life. Really cannot take it anymore. I just can't think of anything to do. And like they communicate it, like if I had had the worst day of my life, it would look like this. I had the worst day of my life, and people would mobilize because I would like be expressing so much emotion. Our people sometimes mask their emotion and then don't accurately express it. So they will be experiencing something and they will be either not saying it or saying it in a word that we negate. So if the person says, I've had the worst day of my life ever, you might be like, oh yeah, me too. You know, because their way of communicating it hasn't helped us to see how dire it is. And so then our responses are minimal or sometimes non-existent. So that's one thing that can happen. The other thing that can happen is this idea of the person with BPD as a relational person. So many times, because they are relational, people with BPD are better in the moment when they're with us. In the presence of loving, validating people, their experience of despair and hopelessness goes down, and they feel better. I mean, you know, I feel better when I'm with my mama. You know, they just do, and especially if we're validating and encouraging. And then they walk away from us, and they crash. And sometimes that's because in that moment they feel better, but they still feel as bad down in the core of them. And the danger for us is that we can treat them like they are better when they're not. So, you know, this could be a problem because you don't want to say to somebody, hey, you look real good, but I think you're not. You know? So I, again, kind of like what I was saying, often check it out. I'll say, you know, gosh, it seems like, you know, negative emotion is going down and you're in a better place and maybe you're a little bit happier. Is that accurate? You know, or are you giving me what I want, feeling better because you're with me, or not accurately communicating to me how bad the experience is? If that happens, then what happens is we end up treating them like they're doing better. They end up invalidating. That's a place where they could end up committing suicide for sure. So you want to kind of ask yourself questions. Have I seen this behavior before? So, have you ever seen this? Have you ever done this? Has anyone here ever tried to stop smoking? I'm proud of it. Or have you ever said, I'm giving up chocolate?
No.
I know, who would ever want to do that? Or some behavior you're trying to change. And it's like, you can either not smoke when you're at work, but you find yourself smoking at home. Or you smoke at home, don't smoke at home, but you find yourself smoking at work because everybody's out of the break. You know, or you say, I'm giving up chocolate, and then somebody brings chocolate to group. You eat chocolate. Behavior is contextual. So just because I can do something here does not mean I can do it there. Okay? Most people do not believe this when I tell them, but I am socially anxious. And so you are seeing me in my context where I'm happy and fairly comfortable. But I had to go to dinner with a group of people last night, and I was totally anxious about it. Like I had to make myself go. Because my capabilities and emotion in one area don't necessarily go to another area. This is true for all of us. So sometimes what happens is we see clients, you know, they're like being skillful over here, and they're not being over here. And we're like, but we know you can do this, and then we don't help them in that other place. So if you're going to do a smoking cessation, you've got to help the person quit smoking at home and at work. And, you know, the first time they go to a bar with friends and it's like the drink bone is connected to the smoke bone. You know? I have not had to quit smoking, but I get it. Okay? So then you have to look at, have I seen this behavior before? Have I seen it happen here before? Have I seen it in this place? Could it be that the environment is increasing arousal? I mean, actually last night my social anxiety was kind of low because I was with Karen Hall, and it was a DBT crowd, so I trust, and a BPD crowd, so I trust those kinds of people. But if I'd had to go out to with a bunch of people who were Houston Texan fans, well, I probably would have been really comfortable there because you could call it football. But you get it, like if I'd had a cold crowd in my neighborhood where I don't know people, it's horrible for me to have to go like chit chat. You know, and then I found that nobody wants to talk about suicide. I just don't know why. You know, you want to bring a crowd, a room silent. They say, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work with suicide. And nobody says a word. You know? So you want to look at that. And then you want to say, is her mood, like is her current emotional state impacting her ability to do whatever it is that she's talking about? Am I assuming that she's capable? I think this is a real problem for us. We look at smart, clever, capable people with emotion dysregulation, and we just assume they ought to be able to do what we think they ought to be able to do. So it's time for us to stop assuming that. What do? You use the 5 steps. Okay, I'm just making sure I get everything in. Unrelenting crisis. We all have seen this one. This is where behavior gets out of control, and out of control behavior begets out of control behavior begets out of control behavior. So it's like a domino effect. And usually what happens is emotion starts building, and then there's one impulsive behavior. And the effects of that one impulsive behavior. So they cut school, and then cut, right? Except now they have to lie about where they were, and somebody goes on Facebook and says she wasn't here because she was off cutting. You know she's that kind. And that increases more emotion and increases more emotion. And at every place where you could have done something differently, you do kind of what your old impulsive behavior is. And so the crisis gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I've seen this happen where, crisis starts and lasts weeks. And it's like, I've stood and watched it happening and going, this is not going to end well. So the person quits their job, and then they get in a fight with their partner, and then they kick the partner out. And then the dog gets sick, like some random thing, but it's always a catastrophe, The dog gets sick, and then they have a fight with their parents about paying for the dog to go to the vet. And by the time it's over, what I am convinced is that there's no graceful way out of this. And so there has to be something that either ends up in a hospitalization or a suicide attempt or something that just ends the crisis. This could be just stopping. So if you've ever seen somebody who was in this place where their emotions were completely cranked up and their behaviors, and they were, just going kind of from crisis to crisis to crisis, and then all of a sudden they're just numb. They've shut it off. They've shut it down. Now the problem, of course, is that suppression. They're actually suppressing, unless they dissociate, but they may be just suppressing that emotion. It's still there. It's still inside of them in that whirlpool. And sooner or later, they're going to do something impulsive, and they're going to go right back. So they will flip back and forth between this unrelenting crisis behavior, as we call it, and then inhibiting all of their emotion. In a way, to me, it's totally understandable. That if you had a ton of them building emotion, and your responses to it were not helpful, that you'd just get to a place where you'd be like, I'm done. I'm just not going to feel this anymore. So people get into this kind of chronic crisis state. I've had clients who said to me, I think I do this because I kind of enjoy the crisis. I find it hard to believe that anybody would enjoy crisis. I always wonder whether that's a product of what we've taught them over the years, like you just enjoy this, and not that anybody enjoys being out. I know when I've felt out of control, that has not been something that I have enjoyed. But I do believe this. There are a lot of us in this world who will be really functional in the middle of a crisis and crash after. So what do you do with this? This is a very hard thing to treat on your own. I think you've got to get professional help. People have to learn how to regulate their own emotionality and to learn to effectively solve problems. But you can help them tolerate distress. Things do happen in life. I promise you, without data, I believe that bad things really happen to our clients. And for some of our people, more than the average person. Sometimes I look at, their mother died when they were 16, their father died when they were 20, their sister died when they were 23, and now they have no one in the world, and I think, why wouldn't you have an emotion regulation disorder? So I do think that, there is some of that, but how do you tolerate that when life is throwing you curveball after curveball in a way that doesn't create more curveballs? And in DBT, we have 8 weeks worth of skills, 6 weeks worth of skills to learn for that. But then they go to, I'm just not doing emotions. This is my client, I think I have this one on here. I don't do sadness. That's what she'd say. I'd say, oh, we've got to help you experience sadness. She'd say, I don't do sadness. She did anger quite well. She did not do sadness. So the minute emotion gets fired up, they will shut it off. Now why? Well, one thing is, when emotion fires so strongly in the presence of things, after a while you get sensitized. So it's like loss and sadness and grief compounds. So, we have things happen in our lives. If we know how to regulate, we grieve. Or, to use an old-fashioned term, we process that emotion, right? It does its thing. We experience it. And it's still around in the presence of cues, but mostly it's gone. If you don't do that, then it's sitting there. And when the next thing comes, not only do you have it, but you're more sensitive to it because you have this other thing. And then you're more sensitive, and then you're more sensitive, and then you're more sensitive. And then when you have new loss, old loss gets compounded. And one of the things that I don't know whether y'all find this to be true or not, but many of my people are very sensitive to anniversaries of things. They can tell you the anniversary of everything that's happened in their life. You know, they're like, when did your dad die? I'm like, sometime in January, but the dog died on July 12th, 1985. You know, like, but I know that date is there, but the calendar doesn't become a cue for grief, but that sensitivity makes, like, for very long memories, but also for then sensitivity to anything around. October seems to be a terrible month for our people, just in general. I think it's hard for everybody, but the leaves start dying, it starts getting dark, and there seem to be a lot of death anniversaries in October for some reason. So I have clients who in August are saying, I feel October coming. You know, it's on the way. And that kind of sensitivity to emotion is already coming. And so by the time October gets here, they're like an emotional ball. They're in that emotion vulnerability place. So what happens when you get there? You stop processing. You just shut it down. Why not? It's way too painful. And so they don't recover. They don't get through emotion. So one of the things we've got to do is help them to experience emotion. So here's just a list. Y'all got this so you can take it with them. This is how you know if a person's inhibiting emotion. They'll lose facial expression. So, you know, we would call this somewhat the flat affect in the biz. But basically, their emotion does not show, it's not that they show an incongruent or a different emotion. They may often show no emotion. They may show no body expression. So you'll see kind of a loss of energy, a loss of kind of whatever their normal nonverbal is. You know, if I stop moving, you know, immediately. Some people it's a little more, not a little as evident as mine. They'll say things to you. I mean, you will hear this in their language. I don't feel anything, nothing's really good right now. You'll say, are you unhappy? No. Are you mad? No. They're not lying. They're not feeling. They'll avoid things that would make them sad. They'll avoid, or whatever the emotion is. Both externally, so they'll stop going places, doing things, and internally, so they won't think about things, or they'll avoid thinking about things. So people always ask me, what's the difference between apparent competence and inhibited grieving? Apparent competence, they'll say they're experiencing the emotion, but you won't see it. So they'll be saying, I'm really unhappy, but you don't see it. They don't match. Inhibited grieving is, I don't have it. It's not there. If they're not there, it's hard to validate something that's not there. So the way you can do that is to say, if I were in your place, I would feel, which is V3, validation, that's mind reading. Is that how you feel? And that's the big thing for you to do, as well as telling your loved one that you know they can experience emotion, that you know they can do this, they can get through this, where you really you express belief in their basic capabilities. This is such an important part of what we do that we're actually thinking about making its own thing. Alan Frazzetti is going to make it the 7th level of validation, which is cheerleading. It's expressing belief in the innate and learned capabilities of your loved one. Then I am a proponent of exposure therapy. That's not the only thing to do, but if you've got a person who's inhibited grieving, they have got to get therapy. That is the thing you need therapy for. So finally, I put this in there so you would have it, knowing that I probably would run out of time. But people always talk when you're watching Dr. Phil. He says you gotta have boundaries. You gotta have boundaries with people with BPD, and you better have those boundaries big, and they better be communicated. And I don't buy that at all, because I don't do anything to one person that I don't do with someone else. But I do have limits. So my client, who we call 82 text client, because she texted 82 times in 6 hours. And I was at my mama's house for the weekend, and every time my phone went ding, I started going like this. What I realized that weekend is that I have a limit about being texted 82 times. I actually couldn't have told you what my limit was before then, but about the time I started going like this, I realized I'd hit a limit. That's how you know. You don't know your limits until they get crossed. And the only way you can know that limit is to feel it. It's a sensation. It's in your body. Then you have to decide, is it time? Like sometimes we cross limits and it's a one-off thing, you know? And if I like called my girlfriend 3 times on the weekend and she didn't want to be called 3 times, and she came back and said, listen, you hit a limit. I need to talk to you. I need you not to call me 3 times. I'd kind of be like, what's with you, you know? But if I did it every weekend, you know, or once in my lifetime, I called my friend at 6 a.m. because I was up. I have a friend now who I could call at 6. We call each other at 6 because we're the only people we know that are on Saturday. But, you know, and she said, listen, hey, don't call me again at 6 a.m. I sleep until 10 on the weekend. So now I call her at 10:02. But if you decide you're going to, tell the person specifically what it is they're doing that's a problem. And then the big thing is, why do you have a limit? It's for your own good. So when I say the 82 texts, I don't want to be texted 82 times. I don't say, it's in your best interest not to text. I mean, it probably is, but it's not in your best interest to call me. Like, I'm doing this to help you. To help you not to text people 82 times. No, the reason I don't want her to text me 82 times is because I don't want her to text me 82 times. So when you're going to tell a limit to somebody, own it. Like, it's all about you. So you say, this is what the limit is. This is what I'd like you to do. I'd like for you not to call before 10 in the morning. This is because I want to sleep until 10 in the morning. Not this is going to hurt me worse than it hurts you. Right? And you can call it 10:02. Tell them what they can do. And then validate. I know you've been up for 4 hours at a point. You're probably waiting to tell me something. But this is how it is. All right, this is my last words of wisdom. I try to think, like if I could give you one word on certain things, what would they be? So here they are. If she's emotional or he's emotional, validate. Do nothing but validate. The higher the emotion, the higher the validation. If you're emotional, regulate your emotion. If you're hopeless, get yourself support. You've got to have a calendar to help with hopelessness. This is why we're here. This is what these guys in Houston have done such a great job at. If you get impatient, remember, slow, incremental change. None of us ever changed any behavior overnight. When you're helping your person, balance out, treating them like they can't do anything, like they're fragile, but don't withhold the same help that you would give anybody else. At the end of the day, if you don't know what to do for the person who you love, do the humane thing. And no matter whether you're a mentalization therapist or a schema therapist or a DBT therapist, if you look at the core of all of those treatments, what we're saying is the only effective response is a humane response, is a compassionate response. And in my world, if you're compassionate, you won't reinforce dysfunctional behavior and you'll validate the experience of the client. And you can't go wrong if you're humane and compassionate. That is what I have to say.